want to sing out, and if you want to be free, be free. 'Cause there's a million things to be. You know that there are. You know that there are. You know that there are.
Hello and welcome to Staff Picks, the podcast for movie nerds by movie nerds. As always, I'm Mario Lanza, and I am your host on our journey through the movies out there that just need a little more love. And our movie in this episode is a special favorite of mine. I can legitimately say, this is one of the rare movies that actually changed my life a little bit when I saw it, and I hold it very near and dear to my heart. And it's interesting because a lot of people hold this movie near and dear to their heart, but there are also a lot of people who have never heard of it or never seen it because it's old. And so I'm going to try to remedy that. The movie we are talking about is the 1971 cult comedy Harold and Maude, starring Bud Cort and Ruth Gordon, a very quirky movie. If you've never heard of it before, I hope there are people that are listening to this who have not seen the movie before, just because I think we will have a very interesting discussion on one of the most interesting movies I've done on Staff Picks. And my co-host for this episode, he is a playwright. He works for the Smithsonian Channel. He is very well versed in musicals and movies and stuff, and I'm very excited to get him on the show. I've been trying to get him on for quite a while because he has a very extensive background with this stuff. So please welcome to talk about Harold and Maude, Stephen Garvey.
Hello, Mario. Very excited to be here and talk about this film. It was kind of a life changer for me as well. So we can talk about just how influential this film has been to us as writers, as comedians, and just as human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we'll get into that in a second. But I want to give you a chance to kind of explain your backstory, who you are, what you do. Tell people especially about the Barty Bunch, because I think that's very interesting.
Yes. So yeah, I'm a playwright, and one of my most well-known plays is called The Barty Bunch. It is a Shakespearean mashup that includes both the Partridge Family and the Brady Bunch, sort of meeting in a 70s sitcom world, but dealing with a lot of the tragic elements of Shakespearean tragedies such as Hamlet and Macbeth and others.
Please tell me that Jan Brady does not get stabbed at any point.
Well, she doesn't get stabbed, but she is sort of the Ophelia in our story. Every Brady and Partridge takes on a Shakespearean character. And as you know, Ophelia drowns. And as you know, in the Brady Bunch, there was a dunking booth in one episode. And that's all I'm going to say about it.
I want to do a staff picks just on the Barty Bunch. You've already intrigued me about this.
Well, the whole inspiration for that musical was I grew up watching these shows, and then I went to NYU's writing school and had to read a ton of Shakespeare. So both of these, sitcoms and Shakespeare were swimming in my head for all these years. But the real inspiration was that in the 70s and the 60s, when a TV show got canceled, they never got to complete their story. It seems like every series today, when it ends, they get their final episode where they can just, sew up all loose ends. And I wanted to give the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family, which were both unceremoniously canceled in 1974, I wanted to give them a proper send-off, and what better way to do that than through the prism of history's greatest writer?
So they all kill each other. Is that what, I don't want to spoil this. I'm just curious. I'm very intrigued by this possibility. I think you and I are going to get along smashingly, Stephen.
Yes, no spoilers, but there certainly are a lot of deaths. It is Shakespeare.
Now, before we get into that, I want to bring up something else for my listeners that Stephen and I have never met. This is the first time we've ever talked, but we already have a lot in common in 2 minutes on this podcast. But you also share the same curse that I do with our famous names, correct?
That is correct. Professionally, my name is Stephen Garvey, but I've been known to my friends and family as just Steve Garvey. But my entire life I've grown up with people asking me if I'm any relation to the Steve Garvey, the famous baseball player from the 70s with his Popeye forearms. And he was just a huge sports icon in the 70s. And growing up, people constantly would ask me if I knew him somehow because we shared a name. And I know you have dealt with that the same.
Yeah, it was funny. Right before this podcast, I said, "Hey, do you know you're named after Steve Garvey?" I'm like, "Of course you know know that? How would you not know that? Because for people who don't know, I am named after Mario Lanza, probably the most famous tenor opera singer of all time. He was very famous back in the 40s and 50s, came to Hollywood, made a couple of movies, has 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, big, absolute, huge star. I am named after him because my mom decided I needed to have a name that would make me stand out. So she's like, you could be Christopher, but instead we'll name you after the Pavarotti of his day, so everyone will ask about it your entire life. So yes, I understand the pain.
Do you have any singing abilities at all?
I have none, and the way I explain that is because if your name was Michael Jordan, you would not even try to play basketball. You would embarrass yourself. So I will not sing ever. I just don't even try it.
Yes, well, I was usually one of the last picked in gym class, so I did nothing but shame the name of Stephen Garvey.
So I should say you probably have a great love for the movie Office Space, for the Michael Bolton subplot. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking
Yes.
about.
Steve Garvey here and I both very much relate to the line, why should I have to change my name? He's the one who sucks.
That's right.
Okay, so now that we've established a baseline that we are basically the same person here, tell us about Harold and Maude. What is your backstory with this movie? How did you get introduced to it? Because I'm going to explain to people, Steve is one of the rare hosts I've had on the show who's a little older than me. This movie predates both of us a little bit, but you're actually one of the few hosts who's a little older than me.
That is true. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to give away my age. But yes, I came across Harold and Maude for the first time when I was in college. I was a sophomore at NYU. I was in their writing program, and it was like a Friday or Saturday night, and I was flicking the channels, and I came across this movie just as it was starting. It was on Bravo, back when Bravo used to show movies as opposed to cooking shows, and it just started, and I'm sure we're going to get into this, but the opening scene, the opening couple of minutes of Harold and Maude, if that doesn't suck you in, I don't know what else could. It's just one of the most brilliant openings of a film I've ever seen, and I just sort of put the remote down and kicked up my heels and just knew that I was just going to be in for the ride for the next hour and a half to 2 hours. And when it was over, it was around 2 a.m. It just cemented that I was in the right program. At NYU, I was in a writing program, because after seeing this, I was like, all I want to do is write visual dramatic stories, whether it's for film, television, stage, but I'm sold. I just want to write stories like this.
That's such a great answer. I love that. Yeah, I came about it in a much more roundabout way, and this will not surprise people at all if they've listened to the show and they know anything about me, is that I only know about this movie because of the movie There's Something About Mary.
Yes.
That's the only reason I know about it, it's because I used to say, and it's still true to this day, my favorite movie is probably The Karate Kid, the original Karate Kid. And so people who've not seen Something About Mary, there's a whole subplot in there that this guy, Pat Healy's trying to pick up this dream girl, Mary, and she's got a movie that she loves, Harold and Maude. She calls it the greatest love story of all time. And I'm like, I'd never heard of Harold and Maude. Why is she talking about this? And then Pat Healy comes in and tries to pick her up by saying he loves Harold and Maude too. And he compares it to my favorite movie, The Karate Kid. So that's the only reason I even know about Harold and Maude. I'm like, is Harold and Maude great, and that's a compliment to The Karate Kid, or are they bagging on The Karate Kid by comparing it to this hack movie? So that's the only reason I checked out Harold and Maude. So that's my roundabout nerd story. Again, a podcast for movie nerds by movie nerds.
That is amazing. But she's not wrong about it being a romantic comedy. It's I think is it the American Film Institute? Someone has it as it's a top 10 romantic comedy of all time.
Yeah, although that does open the question if this is a comedy or a drama, because I have long described this movie. And again, this movie's impossible to classify. I'm going to ask your opinion on this as well. It starts off as a comedy, but it sneaks up on you and becomes very philosophical and like affirming about life and like deep. So I've always described it as a drama disguised as a comedy.
Oh, I always call it a black comedy, because I feel like black comedy really gives you that it's a pretty large umbrella. So you can, a black comedy will, of course, go to those dark places, but also allow themselves to be dramatic. But it's just, I guess, just in the terms of storytelling, and comedies generally have the happy ending, and dramas can go either way. This is just one of the most life-affirming, happiest endings. So I always sort of feel like comedy. It definitely belongs in the comedy category, but just to call it a romantic comedy would probably piss off a lot of fans of romantic comedies. If you recommended this to, someone that watches Hallmark movies and they throw this one on, they might not speak to you for a couple weeks.
Yeah, it's weird because, like, this is, legitimately a comedy. There are so many scenes in this movie that still make me laugh, and I know they're coming. I just love the comedy aspects. But, again, I do think it kind of is an injustice to just to call it a comedy. And I'm just going to add one more thing that I like. If there's a lot of people out there that are sad, depressed, just don't like their lives, they've kind of given up, they're just going through the motions. This movie honestly will change your life if you've never seen it. It will cheer you up and make you appreciate life so much more. And that's why I just think it's a disservice to just straight call it a comedy.
I couldn't agree more. It's just a classification that doesn't really tell the whole story. And you're absolutely right. It's one of the most life-affirming films, and for a film that has as much death as it does in it, that's really quite a trick to pull off.
Although I heard a wonderful description the other day. Someone said, "Oh, you're doing Harold and Maude. Great, you're doing the movie that invented emo kids." I forgot who gave me that quote, but thank you for that. That's wonderful.
I don't know if the film did or Bud Cort did, but because he just seems to naturally have that in him. I remember, I think the first thing I saw him in was Brewster McCloud, and it's just that's just it's just a way about him.
Okay, we're going to stop dancing around the issue. I will try to explain this movie for people who have never seen it. Now, I'm assuming most people have seen it, but how would you describe the plot of this movie to the average layperson, Stephen?
Whew. That's a tough one, because you sort of, talk about dancing around something. You kind of have to dance around the that 500-pound gorilla, which is, it's a love story between a 21-year-old, boy and a 79-year-old woman. And I guess that's sort of the, what people will say if they watch the trailer. But it's really, I would just call it a story about a sort of, about two people who meet, who are obsessed with death for different reasons. And they meet each other and find the commonality between them, find the differences between them. And, one who is in love with life sort of teaches the other one who's in love with death how to appreciate the time that he has on Earth. Yeah,
that's a very good way of saying it. I will bluntly say, I'll give you the two versions that I would say. The blunt storyline here is a 20-year-old is banging an 80-year-old. And that kind of turns people off to the movie. And if you just read that, like when this movie came out, it was very controversial. I think a lot of people were horrified, like, oh my God, you'd write a love story between a 20-year-old and an 80-year-old. But it's so much deeper than that. It's exactly like you said, Stephen, that it's a movie about life and seeing it from two different perspectives. But boy, are these two characters quirky.
They certainly are. Well, there's one scene where Harold's psychiatrist, when he finds out about their love affair, says that he sort of compares their situation as, where some people have an Oedipal complex where they want to sleep with their mother. You seem to want to sleep with your grandmother.
I always forget that line is in there. That always catches me off guard.
Yeah. But it's on paper, that's what it is. But you just have to ask whoever you recommend this film to just take a leap of faith that it's about a lot more than that.
Yeah, and there are minor spoilers in this movie. Now, I don't really classify this as a movie that it will ruin it for you if we tell you the spoiler. But there's a very important plot point early on in the movie that gets established, and it will become big later. So I'm just warning people right now, if you'd want to watch this blind, just go in and watch Harold and Maude now. I guarantee you'll love it. It's just one of these movies I've never seen that people don't love. But we are going to give away some important plot points very early on in the podcast here.
Yes. So, you can pause this right now and then come and join us after you've seen it.
Yes. And again, just before we get into it, this movie legitimately changed my life. And I will just give you a hint. I'll talk more about it later, that I was always kind of an outcast kid. I'm just different. I was different than other people, and I just was. And I was always kind of self-conscious about it. And this movie legitimately changed my life to the point that I actually embrace how different I am now, and I don't try to hide it. And that's what this movie does. And that's why I think this is a very valuable movie that more young people should know about, because it's very, very important, the lessons that it will give you at this point in your life.
That's so great that you say that. And it's funny because you found out about my love for this film on Facebook. I had just seen it for the I don't know how many time, but every Friday night I watch movies with my daughter, who's now 13. We started this when she was 5. We started just watching, having Friday night movies. It started with things like Romeo and Juliet and the B movie, but now she's 13 and now she's ready to take on some more challenging works. And I was still a little hesitant to put this one on because of all of the, it goes to sort of deep places. And but we watched it together and we paused it a couple times just to kind of talk about what we were seeing and what was happening. And you can just tell that it's a very impactful film for kids who are just, trying to figure themselves out and where they fit in. And this film has a ton of quirky characters. It goes beyond Harold and Maude. Virtually every character in this film is a little bit, out there. Mm-hmm. It's a very non-judgmental film too. It just takes such a humanist tone. It really is just it's just all about accepting who we are and not thinking too much about what other people think of us. And there's so many important takeaways from this film that I think, you're right. It really, that a young kid can see this and it could really, really change them.
And I will reiterate again, it's a 1971 movie. It's going to be a little older than most movies you see. So you may be turned off by, the video quality of it or just the old-timey look, but it really is a timeless story.
Yes, and the pacing of it, because it's a slow build. I mean, even that first scene that we, made reference to earlier, there's slow builds throughout. I don't even think Harold and Maude talk to each other until 16 minutes into the film, but it's just you just sort of have to get yourself used to the pacing of a 1971 film, and the payoff always happens. Slow build, yes, but payoff is always so great.
Yeah, and I'm assuming this is something you will probably not disagree with in the slightest. One of the greatest movie soundtracks of all time.
Easily, yes, it's just amazing. Oh, it's just it's what Simon and Garfunkel were to The Graduate. Cat Stevens is to Harold and Maude. He is just almost a character in this film. Actually, he has a cameo in this film. But it's just every time one of his songs comes on, usually at the beginning of a scene, it just sets the tone so well. And the music is, lyrically and musically, it just sets the tone so wonderfully.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, Cat Stevens was a folk singer-songwriter, very prevalent in their late 60s, early 70s, very identifiable sound. You will know a Cat Stevens song anytime you hear it. He eventually converted to Muslim, changed his name, but this movie is like the Cat Stevens commercial. And that's, like Steve said, it's just like Simon and Garfunkel in The Graduate. It's so identifiable with this movie.
Definitely. Yeah, they're inextricably linked.
Okay, so here we go. We will go through the plot of Harold and Maude, including what Stephen already described as one of the greatest opening scenes in movie history. And I know I said that in my White Men Can't Jump podcast. I love the opening scene in that because there's so much going on.
Yeah.
This one may match that. And with that being said, because I trust you, because I know you are so much like me already, I will give you the honor of describing this opening scene to people and kind of setting the stage.
Well, there's no way I could possibly do it justice, but we just are following this pair of feet, or maybe you'll get legs or body shots, or you don't know who exactly you're looking at, but you're just seeing the pacing of someone walking through a room and just very meticulously preparing for something, putting on like a name tag and placing a vinyl record on to play, and lo and behold, it's a Cat Stevens song, "Don't Be Shy," which was written for the film. And you're just watching the pacing of a character who's preparing to do something, but you don't know what. And then you just know there's some sort of ceremonial thing happening. And then you see the feet of this person just sort of take a couple of steps up. I can't remember if it's a stepladder or a chair.
Chair.
But it's a chair. And then as this beautiful, folk music is relaxing, lovely music is playing, the feet kick out, and this person that we've been watching has just hanged himself. and you're just like, oh my God, and you gasp. You're just like, wow, how are we opening a film like this? But then the door opens, and this older woman comes into the room, and she's sort of, walking about, and she kind of pauses and takes a look up to see the dangling figure of what turns out to be her son. And then she sort of stares for a second and then moves about, and she walks over very, calmly to her phone, picks it up, and if I'm not mistaken, she gets on the phone with a friend to reschedule a hair appointment.
Yes. It's the greatest comedy movie ever that starts with a suicide, but it's not a suicide. And that's why this movie we've called a black comedy, is that it's a mother and her son, very reminiscent, if you know Arrested Development, kind of like Lucille and Buster. They sort of have that relationship.
Yes.
And Harold is a moody teenager. His mom is a socialite, this wonderful Vivian Pickles. My wife's personal favorite character in this movie, by the way. She loves the mom.
And one of the best names of an actress out there.
Yes, Vivian Pickles. But yeah, so she sees her son has hanged himself, and apparently this is what Harold, her son, does for fun, just to get attention. He fakes suicides, and his mom is so over it.
And as she's changing her hair appointment, he starts like just gasping, for air, and his legs are like kicking, and he's just like in the throes of seizuring, and she's just not, she won't give him the satisfaction of paying attention.
Yes. We'll find out later in the movie, Harold has done 15 suicides, and this is what he does to get his mother's attention. And his mother, just very proper, very British, very rich, and she just sees him hanging there with his tongue hanging out, and she's like, I suppose you think that's very funny, Harold. Anyway, dinner at 8. And she just walks out of the room as he's dangling. It's juxtaposed over this wonderfully sweet Cat Stevens song. So like the suicide is so brutal and unexpected during the middle of the sweet song, and the mom just couldn't give a shit, and it's so funny.
And it sets the tone, it sets the relationship up so well. I occasionally teach a class on screenwriting, and one of there's two scenes, we'll get to the other one later, from this film that I always reference, and one is just the importance. One of the chapters of the course is just about the importance of an opening scene and establishing tone and character and theme, and this film does it all so brilliantly in just a few minutes.
And this, of course, is not the only time we will see Harold fake suicide in this movie. I think there's 5 or 6, and they get progressively funnier and more over the top as the movie goes along. So I'm warning you, if you find that subject matter distasteful, that's the one thing you may not like about this movie, but this movie goes right for it.
It does, and there's a great scene where the Harold psychiatrist asks him about how many suicides he's done, and he says about 15. And the psychiatrist says, were they all done for your mother's benefit? And Harold says, no, I would not say benefit.
There's about 10 quotes I always remember from the movie. That's one of them. That's such a great quote. So we have the hanging suicide at the start, and Harold can't get his mom to bite and feel bad for him. And then the next scene is they're at a dinner party. She has a fancy dinner party and all these socialite friends at her house. And Harold wants to go upstairs because he has a sore throat. He just hates this life. He cannot deal with this crappy, rich kid socialite life. Again, this is the movie that invented emo kids. Harold is very emo. And he goes upstairs, and now we see suicide attempt number 2, where he very graphically slits his wrists and his neck, spreads blood all over the bathroom, and lays in the tub and gags until his mother comes up and he tries to shock her.
And I think that one actually does get to her a little bit, just because it is so over the top.
Oh, Harold, this is too much. I can't take any more. Again, we're 6 minutes into the movie. We've had 2 horribly graphic suicides, and the mom just is not up for this at all. She cannot handle her son.
Oh, it's just so good. It's so good. And then this sort of leads into it's Hal Ashby, who directed this, and we should talk about Hal Ashby a little bit. Just he started off as an editor, and just the pacing of the first 10 minutes of this film, just almost musical in terms of how he presents scenes, how he then will move to a therapist, and then later to funerals, and there seems to be like recurring themes that are happening, and the pacing of the film is just so great, and I feel that it's just it sort of kicks in right after this scene, because I think after the bathtub scene is the first time we see the therapist, where I think the therapist asks what he does for fun.
Yeah, Harold is a odd young man. He only has one hobby besides the fake suicides. Again, now it's hard to describe Bud Cort to someone who has not seen this movie before. How would you describe him as a actor or a character to people?
Oh, it's very to say understated would be an understatement. It's almost as if he's just been given the dialogue and is just reading it. He's so unexpressive, but at the same time, there's something about his face, there's something about his eyes that, despite what he might be saying, you could sort of see the wheels turning inside his head and what he's thinking, and there are a couple of moments that I swear must be improv, and we'll get to them, where he'll do something that is just kind of takes your breath away, where he just kind of connects with an audience in just sort of surprising ways.
Yeah, and I'd feel remiss if I did not point out he also looks like a corpse. He's so tall and lanky and pale. Like, you totally buy him as this goth emo kid who sits in the house all day, never leaves the house, and the sun has never touched him. You totally buy him.
Definitely, and he's just yeah. He's just an amazing performer.
Yeah, and it's funny because I read other actors they considered for this part. I'm reading like Richard Dreyfuss and stuff. And I'm like, I cannot imagine this movie with anybody but Bud Cort. It just seems so weird if it would be anybody else, because he's so deadpan and other people weren't like that.
And Hal Ashby, I think, had told him, listen, I got to warn you that that you might be typecast for the rest of your career based on this film. But I have a feeling that I think he would have been typecast regardless. Like, there's really only a certain type that Bud Cort, I think, is right to play, and this is just perfect. I had heard Elton John was being considered for the part at one point, and in fact, that Elton John had turned Ashby on to Cat Stevens. This is something I got from IMDb, so I don't know if the IMDb gods are to be believed, but it was interesting to think that what this film would have been if Elton John had been cast in the part of Harold. It just would have been, I think, a very different movie.
So wait a minute, you think Bud Cort would have been typecast as the emo goth kid, and you don't think he would have branched off and done like westerns like Clint Eastwood or action movies? How dare you, sir?
I kept on Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah, he was going to be the original, the
Right.
the original Muscles from Brussels, Bud Cort. So Harold has faked committed suicide twice in the movie. His mom is just over it because she like throws dinner parties and stuff. Again, just think Lucille Bluth and Buster. It's perfect. And then
Yeah.
Harold goes to the therapist, and the therapist is like, "What do you do for fun, young man?" And Harold just has this very deadpan great line, "I go to funerals." Because that's literally what he does. That's what Harold does for fun. He's so obsessed with death and just, the dark side of life, and just he's sad and unhappy. He buys a hearse. That's what he buys with it. He's a rich kid. He gets money. He buys a hearse. He just drives around to random funerals and attends them because he likes being around death.
Yes. Yeah, it's not just that it's not enough for him to just attend funerals, but there's just like, yeah, right after he says that line of, I go to funerals, we see him at the junkyard buying the hearse. He's just sitting there at the car wash getting it cleaned up. And there he is at I think it's an outdoor funeral, the first one. And that's when I think we first meet Maude.
Yeah, Maude, for people who don't know, played by the wonderful actress Ruth Gordon. I am a big fan of Ruth Gordon. I know some people either love her or hate her. She's she plays Ruth Gordon in most movies, but this is probably the most Ruth Gordon movie of them all. But yeah, I love her, but she's just this old quirky woman who attends funerals, and he sees her there, and their paths will become more intertwined as the movie goes on.
Yes, I think in this scene she's just sort of at a distance. I can't remember if it's raining or not. No, I don't think it's raining for this funeral. But she's just sort of somewhere in the background. Just she sneezes. I think that's our introduction to her. Is she just Harold's at a funeral, just listening to the eulogy. He hears a sneeze and turns around and just sees this tiny little Ruth Gordon just sort of wiping her nose. And that's really it. That's their first encounter.
Yeah, okay, so we're going to get more Harold and Maude interactions later, but for now on, it's still just Harold and his mom. And so Harold goes home, and his mom's like, I'm tired of these amateur theatrics, young man. You need to grow up. And she decides two things here. One, she wants him to get married, although that's coming a little later. But she also thinks he should join the army, which Harold is absolutely perfect army material, wouldn't you say?
Oh, pretty, just you would really, really trust putting a gun in this guy's hand.
Yeah, so as luck would have it, Harold has an Uncle Victor, who's in the army, who's an enlister, and she sends Harold off to see him. She's like, well, if you don't have any other plans in life, perhaps you can do this. And Uncle Victor gives him a big spiel. You can be an American hero. You can go to war. You can be like Nathan Hale. And of course, this movie.
Oh, Nathan Hale. Yes, he loved his Nathan Hale.
Nathan Hale, you can be a hero. And of course, that's kind of the underlying thing in this movie is that this is set and came out in the middle of the Vietnam War. So you didn't want to go in the army right then. So this is a very big dissuader for Harold. I do not want to go into the military at all. So that will become a thing hanging over his head, much like Ted Theodore Logan with Alaskan Military School in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Oh, well, yes, of course. I think what we need to bring up about Uncle Victor though is this is it's a cheap sight gag, but it's so great too. Is when Harold's mother sends him to talk to Uncle Victor, she does mention that he was General MacArthur's right-hand man, and we see Uncle Victor for the first time, and he has no right arm.
Yeah, he's just got his sleeve hanging down, but he still wants to salute because he's a military man. He's got a little string he can pull that raises his sleeve up so it will salute for him, and it's just this goofy little sight gag.
It really is, but it's just you really see how like everyone in Harold's life, from his mom to now Uncle Victor and his therapist to a point, they're all sort of trying to direct him in some way to the life they think that he should be living, or any life at all, because he's really doing nothing. But all of their advice is just so awful.
Yes. And it's capped off by our third suicide attempt, which is maybe my favorite one in the movie, the drowning sequence.
Oh, yes. It's wonderful.
I will give you, as a playwright, you can put images in people's heads. Please describe this scene to people.
Well, this is an interesting one because I could see how it could have been shot slightly differently and worked just as effectively. But it's just starts with bam. The scene opens with just looking at Harold's face from an underwater camera that's just showing him face down in his pool, and then it just cuts to his mom. And this is, in their like outdoor pool in their estate. And I think Tchaikovsky is playing some very elegant, sweet music. And the mother is tucking her hair into her swimming cap. And she just begins swimming, a little breaststroke across the pool. And as the camera pans out, as she's swimming, we just see his floating corpse, or what looks to be a corpse, face down in the pool for Lord knows how long. How he's pulling this stunt off is a mystery. And as she's swimming, she sort of pauses a little bit to look and then continues swimming, touches the end of the pool, comes back, sort of has to swim around him because his bobbing body is sort of approaching her swim lane. And she just, continues on without a care in the world. And the final shot is heartbreaking, which is, again, the underwater camera just looking at Harold's, body and his face, his head coming down and looking at her passing by and not paying any attention to him at all. And it's just, he's all of these things are such a cry for help. And she won't give him the time of day.
Yeah. If there is a scene that will always make Mario laugh, it is the mom swimming around her son's fake suicide because it annoys her.
But here's my question to you as a film buff. Is the scene better comedically seeing him first, or should the scene have opened with her just going into the pool swimming and then panning back, and the first time we see Harold in that pool is in that like wide shot of her swimming? I don't know if introducing the him face down in the pool before her going in, I don't know. They both work comedically because it's so brilliant, but it's if I were in the editing room, I would have liked to have seen how it would have played if the first time you see that body is as she swims past it.
These are the kind of important discussions that comedians have. Is it more important to see Harold's dead body first or second? But I do agree with you. If she had just entered the pool and she just starts swimming and she just kind of slowly goes around his floating corpse, that might have been funnier. I don't know.
Who knows? You got to just sort of trust that these guys knew what they got everything so right. You have to figure that they got this one right too.
They have little test audiences. They fill out the form. Do you want more Harold corpse or less Harold corpse?
Oh my Lord! You bring up such a great point. What if we lived in the world of focus groups in the early 70s? And I don't know if we did, because the 70s movies were so much more adventurous. But my Lord, and this film I think only cost $1.2 million, so you can take chances. But how would this film have done in front of a focus group?
I would just love to see my grandparents walking into this movie, having no idea what it was, and seeing these 3 suicides right off the bat. So anyway, then we get the scene here where the psychologist gets Harold to admit he's done this 15 times, and it wasn't for my mother's benefit, I wouldn't say, which is great. And the mom says, all right, that's enough, Harold, it's time for you to get married. And this will lead to one of the fantastic subplots in this movie, as suitors will start visiting Harold trying to get his hand in marriage, and it will not end well because he will fake kill himself in front of every one of them.
Yes. It just keeps escalating with each date.
Yeah, Harold has some wonderful makeup effects. Let's just say that he's very, very good at what he does.
Yes. Well, that was one of the things my daughter and I would have to pause on after each one of these suicide attempts. Wait a minute, how could he have done that? It's just like, well, kid, it's kind of a stylized comedy. It doesn't necessarily jibe with reality.
It's the important discussions you have with your young teen daughter. How did he pull off this fake suicide to fool his parents?
Exactly. It's like, what am I in for, and how am I going to explain this to my wife?
So here we go. We're going to introduce Maude back to the storyline. So Harold's got his own problems at home, and now he goes to his second funeral where he just drives up to random funerals, and he meets Maude, and as often happens, she offers him licorice. So I should point out, this is the classic case of the stranger offering the younger person candy, but it actually works out.
Yes, exactly. This might have been the inspiration for so many predators, and we just don't know.
Damn you, Maude. Okay, so explain Maude. This is where we get a little backstory on who Maude is. She tells Harold why she goes to funerals and who she is.
She is just a vivacious chatterbox, just full of life, just so intrigued by everything around her, and you can just tell right from the beginning. It's just she's intrigued by him. She's seen him before because she is like sort of a serial funeral attender herself. And so she recognizes him from other funerals. So in the middle of the eulogy, you just hear psst, psst. She's like calling out to him and just trying to start a conversation. And she just starts going on about did you know the deceased? Oh, I didn't. I hear he was 80 years old. A good time to move on, don't you think? 75's too early, but 80, you're just marking time. She's just rambling, just talking, but she just wants to know who he is. She wants to know who the person who just passed away is. She just wants to know everything and everybody and learn what their stories are, not to judge them, but to celebrate them. And it's just this, you can just see the exuberance and life in her, and here she is. She's 79 years old, and is just so much so much more full of energy than Harold has ever been.
Yeah, and there's a couple really interesting things about her you learn right away. The first is that she doesn't wear black. She doesn't like the idea of black at funerals because it's too sad. And she likes the whole concept of funerals because it's rebirth. What's a good word here? Rebirth, reborn, renew. Yeah, but she finds the whole idea of funerals intoxicating because someone dies, but someone new is being born. So the whole thing of and she's like, you transform into something after you die. So she doesn't find this whole process sad. And that's what Harold, I think, initially finds intriguing.
Yes, definitely. She comes to funerals because she's sort of celebrating the end of a life, whereas, Harold is going to these things because he's just, he just loves seeing what the impact of death can bring. Here are all of these people going to someone's funeral, someone who died, to respect them, and here he is pretending to die, and he can't even get a shrug out of his mom.
Yeah, no, very true. Although, and there's a very important line here too, and this becomes important later in the movie. We're going to kind of spoil the ending, but I don't think it's that big a deal because it's important to the story. Where she says right here, I turn 80 next week. 80 is a good time to go out, don't you think? She already knows she's going to kill herself in a week.
Yeah, and it's so funny when you watch this film for the second time. It's like The Sixth Sense, where, there's all of these clues that, Bruce Willis is dead. That's another spoiler, but if people don't know that already, that's on you. But you watch it a second time, you're like, how did I miss this the first time I saw it? And with Harold and Maude, she drops 2 or 3 really obvious clues that she is about to off herself, and you don't pick up on it the first time you see it.
Yeah, although I do have to reiterate, yes, it's a suicide movie. Yes, she's going to kill herself, but it's not in a sad way. Like, to Maude, the end of a life is a celebration, so she's not sad that she's going to die. This is just the natural state of when she has chosen to go out, and it almost makes her happier in a way.
Yes. Yeah. As she says, at the funeral, something about once you're 80, you're just marking time. You're less yourself. It's just get out. Get out while you still have your faculties about you.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because that line right there, she's already said she's going to kill herself. There's a couple really interesting reveals that make this movie so much deeper than you realize it is, and that's one of them. The other one comes later, and it's so brief that a lot of people I don't think remember it or even caught it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about when she actually says, I'll be 80 next week, and then later she says it'll be all over by Saturday? Is
I'm
that
not
the
talking
line?
about that. I'm talking specifically, there's a scene later in the movie, they're holding hands on the beach, and he looks down and he sees her wrist.
Oh, well, yeah.
Okay. That's a really deep reveal that really changes this movie a little bit.
Oh, it absolutely does, and it also that reveal brings up an earlier conversation she has with Harold when she's talking about her husband, and and what I guess we will get to the scene later, but it's a tattoo from the Auschwitz concentration camp that Harold sees
Yes.
on Ruth's arm, and you start to put the pieces together that when she came to America, she had gotten out of a camp and she had lost her husband in the camp, and it's just you just realize, my Lord, here is someone who's been through one of the greatest atrocities in the history of man, humankind, and yet here she is able to still celebrate life.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying, and that's a lot of people don't remember that about this movie, or maybe never caught it because they don't harp on it in the movie at all. It goes so quick
At all.
that Maude is a concentration camp survivor, and that is why she attaches so much value to life now.
Yes.
Yeah, it really changes her character when you realize that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really it's just such a powerful scene, and it really it just really just changes the entire perspective you have on her character and the film itself.
Maude does have one fun quirk, and I always forgot about this one until I watched the movie again, is that she doesn't believe that you should be attached to things or people or objects. She thinks everything is temporary and is just meant to be appreciated in the moment, and then it moves on. And because of that rationale, she doesn't own a car, she just steals cars.
Whichever one happens to catch her eye.
Yeah, whichever car she likes at that moment. She'll show up at a funeral, she likes a car, she'll take it and drive away, and then go to the next funeral, leave the car there, grab a new one. And she doesn't see anything wrong with this because people get attached to things too much. So it's just one of her little quirks, and Harold was like, really? And this will become important later when she steals his car.
That's right. Which, why would she think in a million years that a hearse would actually belong to one of the attendees of a funeral?
Yes, but Ruth is just not malicious at all, just this absolute free spirit, and we'll see more of her in a second. But first, let's go back to Harold and his mom. And here's my wife's personal favorite scene in this movie. I like the drowning scene. She likes this scene where the mom has decided Harold is going to join a dating service, that he is going to be married, that leads a aimless life, he needs to grow up, he needs to find a woman. So she takes registers him for a dating service, and she fills out his dating profile for him.
Oh, it's such a brilliant scene that just says so much about both characters, because she's filling out the form, and she's asking him the questions like, do you sometimes have headaches after a bad day? Oh, yes, sure, you do. But then as she's filling out the form, she's really just answering the questions herself, or for herself. Like, do you find the idea of wife swapping distasteful? Oh, I even find the question distasteful.
Yes. So Harold's sitting in the foreground, just looking all morose in a chair, as his mom is filling out his dating profile, answering as if she's the one, like, do you think women's lib has gone too far? I most certainly do. I just love it. She's so great, the mom.
And just so controlling of him, to the point where she's like, it's just such a great bit of comedy.
Do you have a hard time with this? Let's just say unknown. We don't know. Yeah. And so in the foreground, Harold is cleaning a gun because he's going to shoot himself in the head because he hates this.
Yeah, she's filling out the form for him with her own answers, and he's sitting there loading this gun. At one point, even sort of points it at her before finally turning it to his own forehead.
Yes. Harold shoots himself in the head, falls backwards. You just see him in the chair on his back with his feet up, and his mom doesn't even bat an eye. It doesn't even throw her off. She's just like, Harold, please. She just keeps going.
So good.
That is a scene. Again, I don't care how old this movie is. That is timeless comedy. That will make you laugh every time.
It's just so incredibly well done.
Yeah, okay, so Harold, at perhaps a low point in his life, now goes to another funeral, meets Maude again. This is where she steals his car, and she drives him home, or she drives back to her place. That's it. They go to her place for the first time. They talk about her philosophy. This is where she says she doesn't wear black. She only wears yellow. She celebrates life. She's not really into death.
Yeah, and I think I believe this is where she drives. She's in the hearse and she's driving him and asks him so he can drive him home. And he says, well, this is my car. And she's like, okay, well, then you shall take me home. And then he finally, he drives her home and discovers her home, which is actually, it's a train car.
Maude lives in a train, although you could make the parallel even that maybe that's kind of a what's the right word where you're trying to rid yourself of demons. I mean, if they took the trains to the prison camps, maybe she's trying to.
Oh, that's interesting.
I never thought about that until right now. Maybe that's why she chooses to live in a train. It's kind of
some sort of like cognitive therapy of just, it's possible.
Yeah. Well, we get a lot of good quotes here from Maude at her house where she says, don't get too attached to cars, don't get too attached to things. I drive a new car every day because I like a new experience.
Right, and just letting the people know whose cars were stolen here today, gone tomorrow, just...
Yeah, although we learned some things about her. She used to be an activist. She used to liberate animals from pet stores. Although she learned it was too aggressive. She didn't like doing that anymore. But she has a great quote here that I love this. She says, zoos are full, prisons are full, how the world dearly loves a cage.
Yes. And it's interesting because the camera angle as she says that isn't on her and isn't on Maude. And this is a film that's just full of close-ups. It's just always really tight in on the people who are speaking. And when she says that line, it's like an establishing shot of her home, which I suppose it's a home. It's inside. It's a cage. It's just an interesting choice of camera angle that I never really fully wrapped my brain around, because is this supposed to be a cage to Maude? Because Maude to me seems like no cage can contain Maude, but it's I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you remember? Do you know the camera angle I'm talking about?
I know, yeah, it's very specific, but I mean, logistically they just probably had a very small area to work with. But I do agree with that. Yeah, the movie she's talking about life in general, but everything she says is about Harold. He's in a cage. He feels trapped. He's in a world he doesn't really belong in. And again, that's why this movie is so powerful to younger people just finding their place in the world, because everything Maude says is such fantastic advice. It's so amazing. And she's like, yeah, she's a bird. She's uncageable.
Yes, very much.
And then Harold has to leave. He likes Maude. He finds her intriguing, but she's a little much at first. He excuses himself, and she's like, well, please come back and visit again. And you get the sense she doesn't have many visitors. She's kind of lonely, too. And I believe this is where Harold goes to his therapist. Their therapist is like, do you have any friends, Harold? And Harold's like, well, one maybe. So we see Harold actually might be making a connection with someone, as weird as this connection might be.
Yes. And I think he might even fall asleep toward the end of that therapy session.
Yes, there's a fun little visual joke, because he's on the therapist couch with the little head at the end, the pillow at the end where you put your head, but he's laying on it backwards, so his feet are on the pillow, and he has his arms across his chest. He's pretending it's like a coffin. He's got his arms folded across his chest.
And we should also make a comment that every time he sees his therapist, it's usually they're a mirror image of each other. They wear the same exact suits, handkerchief, tie. It's just a very strange visual every time we see them together.
And it's always shot from one or the other point of view. You never see both in the same shot, if I recall.
I think you might be right, yeah.
Okay, so Harold's starting to make a friend, and now we're going to go back home, and now he starts meeting his parade of suitors, the girlfriends his mother has brought to the house to try to hook him up with, and they will get progressively more horrible. Let's talk about Candy, the sorority girl.
We have to start with just the names. So as we bring up each of these dates, we have to bring up their names. This one is Candy Gulf. And yeah, she's a poli-sci major with a minor in home ec, I believe. In case things don't work out.
Let me point out, her name is Candy. This is the second time Harold has already been offered candy in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Carry on. Never mind. Just wanted to say that.
But so she's just she's the mom is sort of just welcoming her into the home, and they're standing by a window that sort of overlooks one of the gardens, I suppose, in the estate, and they're just she's just trying to get to know Candy, and we see Candy's a fairly vacuous person. Seems sweet, but I think she actually also says that she wasn't going to join the dating service, that she sort of lost a bet with her sorority sisters, and she drew the short straw and ended up having to be in this computer dating service, and then of course steps back from that, just like, oh, but I'm not judging. I'm not saying computers dating services are bad.
Yeah, it's really funny that she did this on a bet, and she lost the bet. She had to do the dating service, but that's what the mom was asking. The mom was basically asking if she was a slut. Like, do you do this all the time?
That's right.
So, yeah, poor Candy is in there talking to the mom, and Harold's walking around outside in this big white robe for some reason. He waves to Candy through the window.
Friendly. Just a nice friendly wave.
And as Candy and the mom are talking, Harold, just in the background, I love the way this scene is shot, where you only see him in the background behind the mom. It's in Candy's vision, so she sees him. He goes up on a picnic table, covers himself with gasoline, and sets himself on fire. He erupts in a ball of flame, and Candy screams.
And what's so awesome is just before he lights that match, the mom sort of gives Candy a warning that Harold is a bit of an eccentric, and Candy tells this story about her brother, who's also a real cut-up, and how they once had an old TV with no parts inside, and how the brother, stuck his head underneath and pretended to be in the screen giving the evening news report, and that was her idea of eccentric. And then just as she's telling that story, Harold lights himself ablaze. Now,
there's a deleted scene I know somewhere where Harold has a life-size dummy that looks like him, and that's how he pulls off these suicides. I read that somewhere, so people may not be aware of how Harold's doing this. But yeah, he lights his dummy on fire, and then shows up and announces himself and wants to shake hands. But Candy is so horrified, she screams and runs out of the room. And this is where we get my personal favorite visual from this movie, where the mom is just so dismayed that Harold has chased off his first girlfriend. And Harold just kind of turns and looks at the camera and smiles. And there's this great shot of the mom looking up at him, looking all disgusted with him. It's a wonderful picture. I'm going to use it as the image. If you open these podcasts, there's usually a picture attached to it. That's the picture I'll use for sure.
Oh, it's so great, and I think that's one of the I think that might be one of his ad libs, Bud Cort's. But what's so brilliant about it is that he kind of gives the camera this sly smile, and then he turns back and catches the cold stare of his mom, and he just shuts down. That sly smile is gone.
Oh, do take this seriously, Harold. Okay, so let's go back to Maude. Harold is going to go back to Maude's house because it's the first friend he's ever had, this old, quirky 79-year-old woman. And he sees her nude modeling. That's one thing she does for fun, which already, I know, we don't necessarily see a whole lot of Ruth Gordon, so don't worry, but it's implied. And we see her house for the first time, and she shows off all her stuff here.
Oh yeah. It's a crazy just arrangement of just stuff, and how she's fitting this into a train car. I mean, there's a baby grand piano in there, but it's also her paintings. We learn that she's an artist herself. She has one painting that she shows him that's called something like a rainbow with an egg underneath an elephant or something. Something like that. And also what I loved and was jealous of when I first saw this film, I would love to have had something like this, was what she calls her odorifics, where she captures smells into these containers that she sort of punches into this machine that grinds out and pulls these different odors, and you put this sort of mask over your nose and mouth to breathe them in. And what she shares with him is she calls it Snowfall on 42nd Street, and she starts grinding the machine, and Harold's sitting there just taking in the smells, and it changes from like the smell of being on a subway to the smell of perfume and cigarettes, and finally the fresh smell of snow. And it's just, as he's breathing it in, you could just see him just find this peace that we have yet to see Harold experience in the first hour of this film.
Yeah, he's just sort of smitten with her. And again, it's not romantic. This isn't really a romantic movie. It's love in a different sense. He's just so smitten with Maude because she's just the opposite of his mother. She's just so vibrant and fun and full of life and non-judgmental. She just accepts everything and loves everything, and he's never met somebody like this before.
Yeah, the reins are completely off. It's just he has the freedom to just to explore, to just be himself, and she actually brings him over to some sort of abstract wooden sculpture because she explains that she's a very tactile person. And she just brings him over to it, and she's just like, touch it, stroke it, palm it, caress it. It's very sexual the way she's presenting this wooden sculpture to him, but it's just it's just this she's just encouraging him to just step out of himself and explore life, explore everything. And it's just it's such a wonderful scene where we really see Harold being liberated.
Yeah, we're going to get a long stretch of movie here where Harold is going to kind of be reborn a little bit. And it all starts with Maude. And she's got so many great quotes here, like try something new each day. Life doesn't last forever. Greet the dawn with a breath of fire just to announce to the world that you're there. And then, but again, she's dropping hints that she's going to be killing herself in a week. She's like, I turned 80 on Saturday. It's all going to be over after Saturday, so enjoy life. Like, she's dropping hints, and he doesn't catch that yet.
Yeah, she's like, it's all going to be over after Saturday. Tell me about yourself. She just launches right in, and you just, it goes right past you. But it's so full of these things that, like, I don't know, in any other movie or maybe any other actress, it would just feel like, who is this person spouting out these greeting card, or bumper sticker sayings, but they never come across as that. They just feel so genuine and so lived in. That everything that she says is just its own little gospel.
Yeah, it's one of those things you almost get the sense that Ruth Gordon isn't really acting. Like, that's just Ruth Gordon. That's what's so interesting watching her.
Right. It's like the same woman from My Bodyguard, and of course Rosemary. Was this the first film she made after Rosemary's Baby?
I was wondering that. It's got to be close. I will sum that up for people. In Rosemary's Baby, she plays a horrible, devil-worshipping murderer. She's evil. And in this, she's quirky, lovable Maude. It's quite a whiplash. But yeah, I think this is the first movie after she won an Oscar for Rosemary's Baby.
I think so. But she's quite something else, Ruth Gordon, because she was also a writer. And I think the film Adam's Rib, the Spencer Tracy I think it was Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn movie. She was one of the co-writers of that and was Oscar nominated for it. And it's just she just had so many talents. And I know you mentioned that there's some people that can't stand her. I don't want to meet those people.
I will tell you, my kids cannot handle her.
No.
I know, it's terrible.
Well, your kids don't like the Brady Bunch either, so we got to talk about some of your parenting skills here.
I know, it's I blame myself. Somewhere along the line we went wrong. But yeah, Ruth Gordon I just want to touch on that for a second. I was reading up on her. She had a very, very prominent career long before she was known as an actress. She was like one of the first big female writers of movies and stage and stuff. She was really prominent, and then like later in life she became an actress, and that's what people know. But that was like a career renaissance after her career was basically over. She'd already done a ton of stuff.
And that was one low ceiling back in like the 40s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So she really must have had the talent to break through like that, or probably the charm too, because I would imagine even as like a 25 to 30-year-old, she was probably charming as hell then too.
Well, yeah, she's so tiny and so vivacious. She's going to win you over. She's just a force of nature, as we see in this movie. Okay, so speaking of nature, we're going to go through a stretch of movie. I'm going to kind of skip through some of this just because I want to get to the end.
Yeah.
But there's a whole montage of Harold and Maude hanging out. They go to like watch buildings be destroyed. And it's really interesting to see their different perspective of life. Harold likes the destruction. Maude likes, well, they're going to put a new building there. And it's just, you just see their whole perspective. They're very similar in a way that they're obsessed with death, but like Stephen said, for very different reasons. And this is very prominent when they go to a garden and they see flowers.
Oh, well, this I had mentioned, my film class that there's two scenes I show, and one is the opening. And then there's this scene where they're walking and they pass by some flowers, and she just talks about how she loves to watch things grow and they bloom and they fade and they die and change into something else, and she always says that she wanted to be a sunflower. That was like the flower she associated herself with, and she asked what flower he did, and he points to just this big group of dandelions and just says, I guess those. And she asks why, and he says because they're all alike, and you can kind of get lost in them. And she stops him, and she's like, they're not alike at all. Some are smaller, some are fatter, some grow to the left, the right, and some have lost their petals. And she says that, like all of those dandelions, there are all kinds of observable differences. And she says that that's sort of what the problem with the world today is that people allow themselves to be this cluster of dandelions when they really are each these beautiful individuals. And then there is this brilliant cut that takes my breath away every time I see it. We cut from that group of dandelions that he sees as all being alike, but she sees as individuals, to we're at a cemetery, and we see all of these headstones, all of these white headstones that themselves, you could say, all look alike. And maybe that's what Harold likes about death, is that you die, you get a headstone, and then you're like everybody else and get lost. But to her, every one of those headstones is its own story and its own individual, its own life. And we pull back and we pull back and we pull back. There's thousands of these headstones. And meanwhile, Cat Stevens' Where Do the Children Play is playing. And it's just one of these scenes where it just captures the theme of this movie so well that, one person can look at a group of flowers or headstones and just see just individual things getting lost in a crowd. And someone else can just say, wow, I'm marveling over all of these different lives that are all here grouped together, but all individual. And that is really, to me, it just sums up what is so beautiful about this movie.
Yeah, that's so well said. I'm glad you talked about that visual, the headstones. That's so cool, and it's so artsy and cinematic, and just, it's a very deep shot for what's been a very silly movie up to this point. And I'm going to repeat this quote. You kind of paraphrase it, but I want to say it exactly, just in case. Again, because this movie legitimately changed my life, but I saw it much later. I saw it in my late 20s. Like, if you're a teenager and you're going through that phase in your life when you're a little different than everyone else and it really bothers you, there's a quote here. I'm going to read you a word-from-word quote from Maude that will, no, not kidding, this will change your life. This is the kind of stuff you need to hear when you're young. Where she holds up a flower and it's got some quirks with it. It's like one of the petals is missing. It's kind of bent. And she holds it up and she says, I feel like much of the world's sorrow comes from people who were like this, but allow themselves to be treated like that. And she points to the field of flowers that are all exactly the same. And it's so interesting the way she phrased that. So much sorrow and sadness in the world is when people are different, but they allow themselves to be treated like everyone else in the world. And that's such a powerful statement, I feel.
Oh, it really is. It's just such an amazing message to get across. The things that make you different are the things that make you powerful. and it's just so beautifully communicated in her dialogue and then in Hal Ashby's visuals.
Yeah, although, you know what it reminds me of, just off the top of my head, I didn't write this in my notes, the whole, the discrepancies and the flaws, those are the good things about the world, those are what make it interesting. That's so similar to, do you remember Good Will Hunting with Robin Williams? When he's talking about how his wife used to fart in bed and Matt Damon's laughing. And Robin Williams is like, why are you laughing? That's the good stuff. That's the interesting thing about people, their little flaws. It's not the sameness, it's the differences that make us all special.
Yes. Yeah. That's right on.
Wow, this is going to be the deepest staff picks episode we've ever done, so get ready for that. All right, so let's go back to Maude's house. We're going to have the piano scene here. And this is where we learn Maude's entire backstory with a lot of the stuff about Vienna. You probably remember this a little better than I do. Tell us about Maude's political history and her life history.
What I remember, most was she would talk about the protest. She had that umbrella. I remember on her wall that she was very, very active in protests. And yeah, this is a scene that I'm not as familiar with as other scenes, or don't remember as much as other scenes. So
okay, here, let me try to fill it in. So the short version is Maude is from Austria. She came to America a while back, and when she first came here, she used to picket and go to rallies, political stuff, very, very much an activist. She'd go to rallies, she'd get beat up and dragged away by the cops, and she loved it. She loved just feeling like she was part of life. And she explains, I don't believe in borders, I don't believe in nations, I don't believe in patriotism, but I believe in life and human rights and freedom. And so we learn at one point she was married to a soldier, or almost married to a soldier. She used to be rich, she used to know kings, and she had a very colorful life. And she just said, but that was all before, ... That
was all before. That's when she talks about, how she, misses the kings and the palaces, in Vienna. I think she would talk about garden parties and how she did love that lifestyle. And yeah, she would, and then she mentioned, like joking that she would marry a soldier one day. And then, yeah, she said Frederic would chide me about it. And then she would talk about like, he was a doctor and how he was always so serious. And then she just falls silent and you see the tears in her eyes. And that was all before. And she is definitely lost in this moment of her past. And that's, Harold kind of brings her out of it by asking about, the protests and the umbrella and she just sort of kind of snaps out of it. And that's when she brings him over to the piano.
Yeah. Although she does say one more phrase here that I love. She says, he's like, why don't you protest anymore? Why do you just, flit around and celebrate life the way you do? And she says, because I don't fight anymore. I embrace.
Oh, yes.
That's so cool. And then she says, she immediately goes over to the piano. She's like, want to play a song? And he's like, I don't play songs. She's like, everybody plays songs. And she sits down and she sings what will be the anthem of this movie. It's a real Cat Stevens song, but we get her version here, the Ruth Gordon version. If you want to sing out, sing out. And it's kind of a grating song when she sings it, but it's a cute song, and we'll hear it later many times.
Well, she couldn't be worse. The singing is terrible, and that to her is exactly the point. It really doesn't matter how badly I'm singing. Listen to what I'm singing about. It's just that if you want to be you, be you. If you want to sing out, sing out. There's a million things to do. Who you are. It's just this Cat Stevens song that was written for the film, and we'll hear him sing it later. But right now, she's sitting there at a piano, and we're like, well, she can't sing, but at least she could play piano until she gets up and starts dancing and the piano's still playing. It's a player piano. So she doesn't really play the instrument. She can't really sing, but she's totally in the moment and enjoying the song.
Yeah, although the big takeaway from this scene is the song, her history in Austria prior to World War II in the concentration camps. And the other thing is that Harold doesn't play any instruments, and she's shocked. He's like, I don't do anything. She's like, everybody's got to play something. And she opens a cabinet, and she's got like every instrument in there, which she's presumably stolen at some point. But she chooses the banjo. That will be Harold's quirky instrument. And he's like, I don't know how to play. She's like, figure it out. That's what life is about. Take chances. So she gives him a banjo. And this will be Harold's little symbol the rest of the movie, this banjo that he's now learning to play.
Yes. Yeah, in the very next scene, we see him practicing it just as his mom calls him away from practicing the piano to show him the beautiful Jaguar she just bought him.
Yeah. His mom has thrown away his hearse because she doesn't like the eyesore it takes up in front of her mansion. She buys him a new Jaguar, and Harold's first move is to instantly get out a blowtorch, and he's going to convert the Jaguar into a Jaguar hearse. I don't know where Harold learns these car mechanic skills. Personally, I don't think he'd be able to do that, but we'll go with the movie that he is able to convert it to this awesome Jaguar hearse. We'll see later in the movie.
And it is amazing. And from what I understand is there was only one Jaguar hearse that was made for the film. And we can talk about what happens to that hearse later. But it's a shame that thing, that Jaguar hearse, belongs in a museum somewhere.
Yes. If only we had Indiana Jones to rescue that thing and put it in a museum.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a long stretch of the movie here where they go to rescue a tree. And I'm going to skip over this mostly because it's not as important as the stuff that comes after it.
Except for the fact that Tom Skerritt plays the cop. I've seen this film 20 times, and it wasn't until I did a little research on it last week where I saw that it was Tom Skerritt from Alien and Picket Fences, and it was just I had no idea it was him.
Tom Skerritt under a pseudonym. Did you see that? He's not billed as himself. It's like M. Borman.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, that's probably why it got past me all these years.
Okay, the short version is Maude sees a tree. They're downtown in San Francisco somewhere. She sees a tree, and she's like, this tree shouldn't be here. It should be in a forest. It's suffocating from the smog, and she's very sensitive to plants and nature. So she and Harold liberate the tree, steal a car, steal the tree, steal some tools, and go and plant it in the forest so it can be with its friends where it deserves to be. There's a whole running gag with this cop trying to pull her over, this Tom Skerritt, and he can't because when she pulls her over, she just steals his motorcycle. But it's just Maude's, I don't believe in cars, I don't believe in licenses, I don't believe in paying tolls. And she just says, nature is what it's all about, the earth is my body, and that's the whole long stretch where they replant this tree out in the forest.
Yes.
All right, so here we go. We're going to learn about Harold's first suicide attempt and why he does this. This is the hookah scene, and this is a very deep scene. I always forget this scene is in here.
Whew, it's a really, really powerful one. It's and a really great monologue too, and so well delivered by Bud Cort. I think a lot of people just kind of say, well, Bud Cort, he's a kind of a one-note actor, but this is a really emotional scene, and it's just heart-wrenching, and so much of it is his performance. He's talking about when he was away at boarding school, and no shocker that that he would be sent away to boarding school by his mother. But I believe, if I remember, he was was in a chemical lab after school or after class, and he started messing around with some of the chemicals, and there's this horrible explosion, blows a hole through the floor, and he sort of realizes, well, this is going to get me kicked out of school, so he just leaves. And he sneaks back home, and again, no surprise at all, the mom is in the middle of throwing one of her many parties, and so he comes in, and he just sort of sneaks off to his room, but right on the heels of him coming home and his mom not seeing him because she's throwing her party, there's a knock on the door, and the police are there, and the police have presumed that Harold was part of this explosion. That part is correct, but they had thought that or assumed that he had been blown to bits. And Harold is watching his mom learn the news about his death, and she sort of swoons, puts a hand to her head and legitimately passes out from shock and grief. And that is the reaction that I think with all of these fake suicides, he's been trying to recreate just to have that connection with his mom. And he starts, as he finishes this story, he sort of puts his head down, and it looks like he's laughing at just the absurdity of the story. But then he pulls his head back up, and you see that he is just sobbing uncontrollably. And he says that it was at that moment that he realized, he enjoys being dead.
Yeah, it's a very deep scene and very well acted and very serious. Like, you get the sense that, Harold's joking about all this stuff, but this scene he's deadly serious. Like, I enjoy being dead because people care about me if I'm dead. And Maude understands this and she consoles him. And Harold's crying. And Maude has another wonderful quote that I have to say this word for word just because it's so interesting. This applies to so many people out in the world, people I know, like people I don't know, where Maude says, "A lot of people enjoy being dead, but they're not dead, really. They're just backing away from life." Wow.
It really is. It's just she always just has just the absolute just perfect things to say, and then it just leads to this pep talk of her just saying, like a literal cheer that she gives, give me an L, give me an I, give me an F, give me an E, or V, give me an E, live. Otherwise you got nothing to talk about in the locker room. And it's just again, delivered by anyone else, you might roll your eyes, but in the moment and coming from the character of Maude, it's everything. It's just everything he needed to hear.
Yeah, no, there's so many good little bits of advice here that are really applicable to people in the real world. So that's why I say people should watch this movie where Maude says, aim above morality. If you apply that to life, you're bound to live it fully. I like that one. Vice, virtue, it's best not to be too moral. You miss out on too much life. And then here's the one that's really especially important. Reach out, take a chance, get hurt even, but play as well as you can.
Yeah. I mean, that's just it's so great. It's really words all of us should be living by.
Yeah. And then Harold just looks up at Maude, this weird 80-year-old woman with this odd past, and he realizes he's kind of in love with her at this point. He's like, he didn't expect this, and he can't phrase it correctly, but he's like, I like you, Maude. And she says, I like you, Harold, and they dance together. And it's, again, this is where it's getting into the romance, where it's like it honestly is the greatest love story of all time. Mary was correct in Something About Mary. It's very pure.
I think so too, because you just sort of strip away all of the, the physical attraction that just, let's face it, the physical attraction tends to really complicate matters. It makes us like people that we probably shouldn't, and it keeps us away from people that we should be around. And this it's just looking at two souls that have found each other and have fallen in love with each other and had connect so well. And it's just so damn beautiful.
Yeah. And speaking of beautiful, let's go to date number 2. Dating service girl number 2 would be more applicable, where we meet the wonderful Edith Fern.
Edith Fern, who is a file clerk for like some feed and grain industry. She's just really, really just loves talking about that with Harold's mom. I think she says she's in charge of all the invoices for the Southwest. She says we supply most of the egg farmers in Patagonia, so you can imagine.
Yeah. She and Harold are going to hit it off instantly. Instant connection. Yeah.
Her introduction to Harold is just as he's finishing up on his Jaguar hearse. In fact, I think that's where we first see what he was doing with that blowtorch, was creating this hearse. So the mother discovers it along with Edith Fern.
So this chatty young file clerk comes in for her date with Harold. And again, Harold has already established a pattern. When a date shows up, he's going to horribly injure or kill himself just to freak her out and make her leave. And I know a lot of people, this is their favorite Harold fake suicide attempt. Although this really isn't a suicide. This is just shock value. Where in the middle of conversation with Edith Fern, he pulls out a meat cleaver and chops off his hand right in front of her.
And he wastes no time in doing it. He sits down. I think he maybe offers her a cigarette or something. She says no. And then he just proceeds to chop off.
And it's so violent. The axe comes down and he hits it as hard, or the hatchet comes out. He hits it as hard as he can. And the look on her face, her eyes get real big. And the mom just lowers her head to her hand. She's like, oh, no, not again. Now, I got to give a little Mario trivia here. The actress who plays Edith Fern, her name is Sherry Summers, And I mention her because she's also in what is another one of my favorite movies of all time, The Bad News Bears. The Bad News Bears, she plays the wife of the evil coach, the Yankees. She plays Jill Turner.
Vic Morrow's wife?
Yes.
Oh, my God.
Vic Morrow's wife. And she wears the tightest pair of bell-bottom hip huggers I have ever seen on a person. And every kid I knew who grew up in the 70s remembers that shot of Jill Turner walking away in her tight pants.
That's right, with the Courtship of Eddie's father,
Yeah, with
right?
with Brandon Cruz. Yeah, with him.
Yes, because he had just held on to the baseball to piss off his dad, and he slaps his son, and everyone is just silent, and then she comes in and takes him home, and I know
Okay,
the shot
so
you're
that's
talking about.
Sherry Summers, and almost every kid I know who's my age had a crush on Jill Turner because of that hot pants shot, because she's so hot in that movie. This is the other movie she's in. She's Edith Fern. This is 5 years before The Bad News Bears. That's Sherry Summers. And so that's all for years. I'm like, hey, that's Jill Turner. She was in another movie. And so she did these two movies and then basically dropped out and stopped acting ever again. But these are the two movies. But there's more trivia is that she married the producer of this movie, Charles Mulvihill. They got married on the set, and that's why she stopped acting. So Edith Fern is very prominent in this movie, Sherry Summers, that actress.
Wow, what a great bit of trivia.
Yes, and I only know that because I remember that tight pair of bell bottoms in The Bad News Bears.
So I wonder, what would be, more offensive, seeing your husband slap your son, or being on a date where someone pretends to chop off his arm.
Sherry Summers went through the ringer. Let's just leave it at that. She had a poor time dating.
What's the bigger turnoff?
But the Edith Fern scene is so great, and just Sherry Summers has these wonderfully huge eyes when she sees Harold cut off his hand. It's a scene you will never forget if you've seen it.
Oh, it's fantastic.
So the mom is kind of a last resort, decides Harold is going to be enlisted in the army. The threat is now going to be followed through. She enlists him in the army. He's going off to war. And so Harold says, please, Maude, do something. They're going to draft me. I don't want to go. And again, this is in the middle of Vietnam. You don't want to go anywhere, 1970, 71. And so there's a little slapstick scene where Maude gets him out of the army. If you want to, we'll quickly go through that one.
Yes, I think she says, well, with your skill and my experience, I'm sure we can think of something. And what they think of is Harold invites Uncle Victor to a park, and they just sort of have a little talk about, what the, how his future could change in the army. And at first, Harold starts, part one of the scheme, which is to just act in a very sort of masochistic, maniacal way, just talking about the joys of killing in the army, of the hand-to-hand combat, and of slitting your enemy's throat, and taking souvenirs of your kill, like the eyes, the ears, the privates. And clearly Uncle Victor is starting to get a little disturbed by all of this. And then Harold pulls out a shrunken head and saying, well, what about this? Can I do this with my kill? And just as just as Uncle Victor is starting to get a little unsettled with his nephew, Maude shows up in the form of a protester, someone that's looking to end the war. She's speaking out for peace. And Harold just starts, screaming at her and calling her a commie, and they have this fake argument in front of Uncle Victor, and she takes his shrunken head, and Harold starts screaming, "She took my head! I'll kill her!" and starts chasing her. In fact, I think he grabs her protest sign and is swinging it at her, trying to she runs down these stone steps, this part of the park that's by the water, and there is some sort of hole in this one part of this platform area that she falls through. And again, not sure how this stunt would have been pulled off in reality, but it would appear that he just chased her and cornered her, and she fell into this hole and to her probable death. And meanwhile, Uncle Victor is chasing Harold, trying to stop him, and his arm salute gear sort of malfunctions, so he's in in salute with the sleeve of his jacket while he's chasing Harold. And it's just well, clearly when all things are said and done, Uncle Victor realizes Harold is unfit for the army and will not be taking him.
Yes. Short version is Harold kills a war protester and is kicked out of the army for being too violent. So Harold's good now. He won't have to go to Vietnam. So all is good. It's the only slapstick scene in the movie, but it's kind of silly, but it gets him out of the army, so that's good.
Yes.
All right, so we're in the end part of the movie here. It's really just Harold and Maude hanging out here, and we learn that Maude doesn't pray. She communicates with life, and at one point they're at a park, and Harold's like, I just feel like doing a somersault right now. And she's like, then do one. He's like, but I'd look silly. She's like, so what? Everyone has the right to make an ass out of themselves. Don't let the world judge you too much. And this is the whole thing with Harold. Like, it's fine. Make mistakes. Be silly. Live life. Just enjoy. And you see a whole montage of him just slowly starting to do that under her tutelage.
They're dancing outdoors, doing somersaults. He's giving her a piggyback ride at one part. And it's just you're just seeing him just make expressions, smiling, which is just, it really does say what kind of an acting job it is that you could be, good hour and 15 minutes into a 90-minute movie, and the only smile we've really seen out of Harold was that sly one he gives after the first date. And this scene is just you really start to see the joy come out of him, and it's such a welcome sight to see him just making these, the mugging sounds he makes before he does the somersaults, and just it's just such a joy to see him coming to life.
Yeah, and this is most of the romance stuff comes very, very late at the end of the movie. So like when I made the joke, it's a 20-year-old banging an 80-year-old. It only happens very, very a very tiny bit right at the end, and we're going to lead up to that here, where their love is starting to become a little more romantic. He says she's beautiful. They hold hands. She's like, oh, Harold, you make me feel like a schoolgirl. And this is the really quick shot I mentioned earlier, and a lot of people don't remember this. He looks down when they're holding hands, he sees her wrist, and he sees the Auschwitz tattoo, or some prison camp, I don't know which one specifically. And that tells you everything you need to know about Maude's backstory and why she is the way she is, that she has been through hell.
Yeah. Yeah, and it instantly draws you back to that, that earlier scene when she's talking about, Frederic, and he was so serious, and that was all before ... and you realize that this is something she's been, carrying with her for, 25 years, I guess, as far as this film goes, if I got my math correct. And it's just it really is such an alarming sight to see. And if you were like my daughter, who I take the phone away from when we watch movies, if you were like looking at your other screen at the time, you would have missed it, because they don't allude to it, they don't say anything. It's a visual that's about 3 or 4 seconds, and then it's gone.
Yeah, you really have to think about it. And again, that's why I say this movie's deeper than it gets credit for. It really is. The more you think about it and pay attention to what's going on, there's a lot going on here. Okay,
Yeah.
So we're just about to Harold and Maude consummating the relationship, which you don't see, of course. But we have one last dating service date that we have to get out of the way first. His mom has arranged a third and final date, and she warns him this is your last chance. And I'm guessing you like this one with your Shakespearean background. So I will let you talk about Sunshine.
Sunshine. Yes, the third date, she is an actress, or at least she likes to think so, as she says. Very, very full of herself, very, very impressed with her own acting ability, although the little glimpse we have of her acting skills leave much to be desired. But they slip into that's why I made a note about slipping. There's just one funny scene. I don't know if it's an outtake that they left in, but when Sunshine and Harold leave the room to head into another room of the mansion, she just slips as she's walking, and there's no real reason for it to have happened. I think it just happened, and they all got a kick out of it, so they left it in. But anyway, that's a happy little accent that always cracks me up. But so they retire to a room where Sunshine sees a Harry Carey blade and asks Harold about it, and he asks her if she knows sort of the history of Harry Carey, and she does, and so he acts out, the whole process of taking this large bladed sword and impaling himself in it, but very ritualistically, where he lays out a mat and he kneels before it. He takes his tie and he slings it over his shoulder, so there's an unobstructed path from blade to his stomach, and he impales himself with it.
Let me jump in real quick. I love the setup. Why I love this scene so much is that she walks in and they're talking and she sees he has a knife collection. She's like, "What's this?" He's like, "Oh, it's a seppuku blade. It's a hirikiri." She's like, "What's that? Would you show me?" And he kind of looks up and you know where it's going. Like, "Oh, please show me what ritual suicide looks like." So he's going to show her.
And that he does. And when he dies, she is so impressed. But as an actress herself, from the Sunshine Playhouse, she knows that, that this is acting and that it must be a retractable blade. And so she mentions that she once played Juliet in a production of Romeo and Juliet. So she starts acting out Juliet's final, suicide scene, and with, just the poorest delivery of, "What here? A cup closed in my true love's hand?" And she tests the retractable blade, of course, as any actor, would, and before driving it into herself, and then she collapses very dramatically next to Harold. And the two of them are lying there on the floor, seemingly dead. And, of course, that's when the mom enters the room and delivers her, "Harold, that was your last date."
Yeah, this is a great, silly scene, the double ritual suicide, where the girl is actually into it. Whatever Harold's doing, she's into it. But it's funny because there's a bigger point to it. You think this is a silly little moment, but there actually is a point here that this girl is actually maybe perfect for Harold. She's into his little theatrics. And the mom is horrified. She's like, "There's no way I'm having two of these in my family." So she kicks her out. But on paper, this girl might have worked with Harold, but it doesn't matter because Harold's in love with Maude now. So it's not going to happen.
It's not. Yes, it just wasn't meant to be.
It was your last date.
That was your last date.
Okay, so Harold is done with the dating service. He's decided he's all in on Maude. Maude is now his girl. He doesn't care anymore. And they go to the carnival. They go to this nighttime carnival. And again, this is the night before Maude's 80th birthday. She's going to kill herself tomorrow. Harold doesn't know this yet. And this is where they hold hands and they walk hand in hand and people kind of stare. And Harold gives her a note finally. And it says, "Harold loves Maude." And Maude looks back at him and says, "Oh, that's the nicest gift I've ever received. Maude loves Harold too." And this is how they become a romantic couple. But she does something very interesting with that note.
Yeah. I think he's like, people have said, "Oh, it's a ring or a necklace," or I think it's like one of those like machines where you like either put in a penny and you can sort of spell something out into it, or some sort of coin that's flattened, but you can create a message, and that's what he creates. And she takes it and she holds it to her heart and then tosses it into the water. They're standing by like off the shore, and she just throws it into the water, and he looks at her like, "What the hell did you just do?" But before he can even express a thought or utter a word, she just says, "So I'll always know where it is."
I love that. That's so cool.
It really is. It's just such a wonderful, wonderful moment that it just makes no sense at first, and then she has that answer, and you're just like, yeah, that is so Maude.
That is what Maude would do. She'll never lose it. It's in the Bay of San Francisco. She knows where it is.
Right, exactly.
Okay, and this is where now we cut to fireworks, which is our metaphor for them having sex. And, blissfully we do not see it, although I know Hal Ashby wanted to film a love scene, but the studio shot him down.
Yes, and no train entering the tunnel. I'm glad they just went with fireworks.
Yeah, so Harold and Maude sleep together, and we just see the aftermath the next day with them laying in bed happily. He's got his shirt off. She's, topless with her blanket up to her neck, and she's sleeping. And he's, in most movies they'd be smoking cigarettes. No, Harold is blowing bubbles.
He's blowing bubbles. The great image.
Yeah, and again, this is the end of the movie. I always forget there's only like 8 minutes left in the movie. It's very quick here.
Yeah, it's a boom. Right after that, we see Harold with his mom, and he says he's getting married. In fact, I think she is on the phone with her friend from the first scene, uh, when he shows a picture of her, and and she looks at it and she's like, is this some kind of joke, Harold? Because it's a picture of a sunflower, and then he flips it, and on the other side is a picture of Maude, and she was like, cannot be serious.
Well, all along, all his mom wanted was for him to settle down and get married. So Harold is technically fulfilling the bargain. He's like, I'm getting married. She's like, really? To whom? And then he shows this picture of this old, tiny, 80-year-old woman. Harold, you can't be serious. And he just leaves. He just walks out in the middle of her sentence and leaves her.
And then there's this like great grouping of vignettes of Uncle Victor trying to talk him out of it with a picture of Nixon, a framed picture of Nixon right next to him. And then there's the therapist trying to talk him out of it with a framed picture of Sigmund Freud next to him. And then the priest with the Pope framed picture next to him, and they're all just trying to talk him out of it from one way to the other. And the priest has some sort of monologue where you could just tell he's just trying to keep the contents of his lunch down while he's describing what a relationship between a 20-year-old and an 80-year-old must be like physically. The withered flesh.
Yeah, the priest is, it makes me want to vomit. And this is where we get the quote that you said earlier from the therapist, that most men want to sleep with their mother. What puzzles me is you want to sleep with your grandmother. And really, this is the end of the movie. I always forget how abrupt this is. We go to the last scene of the movie. It's Maude's 80th birthday, and Harold and Maude are dressed up. He's at her house. They're slow dancing. He bought her champagne. He gives her a flower, and he's like, I have another surprise for you later tonight, and he's going to propose to her. And I don't know if she has figured this out, but she basically heads him off by saying, well, that's all wonderful. This is the nicest gift I've ever received. I could not imagine a better farewell.
Yes. And that's when he's like, what are you talking about? And she says that she took the tablets an hour ago. I'll be gone by midnight.
Yeah, she OD'd on sleeping pills, which was always her plan. And she's not sad about it. She's, kind of resigned. This is the last day. But in her mind, that's the circle of life. I'll be reborn as a sunflower. This is a wonderful moment. And Harold does not quite see it that way.
No, he just stares at her wide-eyed, and just as he's screaming, what? We cut to just the sound of an ambulance, and boom, we're in the back of the ambulance where Maude is on this gurney, and Harold is just saying anything he can to just stay alive, just I love you, and all she can say in response is, that's wonderful, Harold. Go and love some more. And it's just, and to him, he's like, never, I can't. He can't get past the moment, but she's already miles ahead of him.
Yeah, and again, everything that she has said through the movie, don't get too attached to things. Things come and go, get attached to life. This is the ultimate test. She's like, I was a thing. Go love some more. I've given you all you need to know. This is where I'm supposed to exit stage left, enjoy life. And Harold freaks out. He takes her to the hospital, rushes her to the hospital. She's going to die. He pleads for people to help her. They can't help her. She's too far gone. And the movie basically ends with Harold jumping in a car, and it's all shot in a montage where it's happening all simultaneously, all these things at once, where you see him driving and crying and panicking and screaming because he's lost the love of his life. And he's driving his Jaguar hearse, and he's going to kill himself. He's going to go drive off a cliff, just like he's been doing. He's been fantasizing about killing himself for years, and this is where he's finally going to do it.
And it's such an amazing montage. It's Cat Stevens' Trouble starts playing, which is just such a phenomenal song. And it's intercut. There are scenes in the hospital of Harold just pacing, waiting to hear the news, just beside himself, distraught. And while we're, interspersed with these hospital shots is just shots of him driving in that Jaguar hearse and just peeling around, passing cars, going over the double yellow lines. He's, being reckless, and you're just so damn worried of what lesson Harold might have taken with all of this time, really just a week that he had with Maude. Did he get it?
Yeah, exactly. Did he take the lesson literally, or did he take it too personally? And you see his car go flying off a cliff. He drives off right by San Francisco somewhere on some cliff. His poor Jaguar hearse goes flipping down to its death. And you think Harold is in the car. You think he has finally done it. He finally did kill himself. But the movie has a nice twist ending, doesn't it?
Yes, the camera, after really lingering on that car crash for quite a while, it pans up the cliff, and there at the top of the cliff is Harold with a banjo strap around his neck, holding the banjo, and just plucking out the opening notes to if you want to sing out, sing out. And that's when Cat Stevens' version of the song kicks in, and Harold just, plucks away, moving, along the meadow at the top of the cliff, away from the cliff. That was his last fake suicide. You feel like, he is ready to move on and to really live a life. And he's actually dancing while he's playing, and it's the most alive we've ever seen him.
Yeah, Harold had a chance to choose death at the end, and he chose not to. At the last minute, you kind of get the sense he kind of chickened out and just made the car go off instead, because he's just, things are temporary. Get rid of the car. Who cares? And as he's dancing away, you realize he has chosen life. For the first time ever, Maude's spirit has been passed into him. She has, again, been reborn as she was hoping. It's now the spirit is in him. He dances off with his banjo. And it's just one of the sweetest movies I have ever seen. It's so amazing the first time you see it.
It really is. It really is. And you just come away with such a great feeling. And just knowing that, we all have a little bit of Harold in us, but none of us are exactly Harold. It's hard to imagine someone like Harold really coming out on top, and he does. And just to see how even someone this fascinated with death, this person who has given up so much on living a happy life, to see him come out in this life-affirming way where he is just, dancing and making music and just marching towards a future that, who knows where it'll be. He'll probably move out of the house. I really hope he does. But you just come away with thinking, like, if Harold can come away with this, looking at life in this great positive way, then that's a message we can all really embrace.
Yeah, absolutely. And for years, I always said this movie was incomparable. I could never think of another movie I could compare to Harold and Maude. It was so different. Its use of, life and life-affirming messages, but dark humor and darkness, and just, it's all over the place, but it's ultimately a very sweet tale of hope and life hidden in this dark, dark comedy. But I actually saw a movie recently that I would compare to Harold and Maude for the first time in about 40 years.
Oh, wow. What was that?
Jojo Rabbit.
Oh, I just saw that was our last Friday night movie with my daughter.
Yeah, and I was like, this is the closest I have ever seen to Harold and Maude, because it's this dark, dark, dark comedy, but underlying, there's so much of a sweet message about life and hope and differences that I'm like, that's the closest I have ever seen.
It's really interesting you bring that up, because the first half of that movie, I was just like, I'm really interested in everything that's happening to this movie, and but I'm not making an emotional connection to it yet, but I'm really appreciating it. And then somewhere, and because I don't want to give away spoilers to that one, but something happens where suddenly it all changed for me, and I really became just really engrossed and engaged in the story and in this kid, and it just took on a whole different life for me, the second half of the movie, which made me, I got to see the film again, and so I can appreciate the first half in a better way, because I don't know why it took me a little while to really get hooked into it, but it really is a pretty special film.
Yeah, so that's my quick recommendation. If you guys like Jojo Rabbit, go seek out Harold and Maude. Very similar themes in a way. It involves kind of the same dark tone underneath, and I just actually mentioned that to a friend of mine who's a film student. He's like, Oh my God, you just compared Taika Waititi to Hal Ashby. That's incredible. I never thought about that before, but they are real similar to me, just in a weird way.
I think so too, and just your fascination being misguided, and learning to sort of from life experiences and the people and the people you side with, learning to see life and what's really important in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, we wrap up our coverage of Harold and Maude, which to this point is the oldest movie I've done on Staff Picks. Although that will not be the same in the future. I'm doing the Poseidon Adventure soon. I'm doing Carnival of Souls at some point. I'm doing Rosemary's Baby probably. So we're going to get some 60s movies eventually. But up to this point, this is the oldest movie. But one of the movies I feel the strongest about, and I hope that comes through in the podcast.
I would think it would. We're both clearly pretty passionate about this one.
So before we sign off, I will. Do you have anything else to say about Harold and Maude, Bud Cort, Ruth Gordon, Cat Stevens, anything?
Boy, I think we pretty much ran the gamut there. I don't know. I think I pretty much said peace.
Sherry Summers in tight pants. Anything else we want to talk about?
Right. Well, if you haven't done a Bad News Bears, well, you did Bad News Bears and Breaking Training, didn't you?
I've done both Bad News Bears movies. I did the original as well.
Oh, God, because that original one. That, I would say Bad News Bears, Harold and Maude, Breaking Away, and all that jazz are the 4 movies that made me want to be a writer.
I'm so glad you just mentioned one of those movies because I have been looking for a Breaking Away co-host for the longest time.
Sign me up.
All right, so Mr. Steve Garvey, the first baseman for the Dodgers here, will return for my Breaking Away podcast in the future.
Fantastic. I could talk about that one all day long.
Okay, before we sign off, once again, give people a plug how they can find the Barty Bunch, because I want to find out myself now. I'm very intrigued by this.
Oh, well, the Barty Bunch is currently available for licensing. Broadway Licensing, which is at BroadwayLicensing.com, is the agency that represents it. They are licensing it out to regional theaters, professional theaters, and interestingly enough, high schools all over the country right now. In fact, there's a few going on right now in Montana, LA, and Utah, and it's just it's a blast to watch this show performed by high schools, because these are kids who never heard of these shows before, but they really embrace an actor, a high school kid that is, a theater kid, just wants to be cast in the show. It doesn't really matter what the show is, but it's amazing to see how wrapped up they get into that Brady Bunch Partridge Family rivalry. It's very Team Brady, Team Partridge, and it's pretty hilarious to see that come to life with real teenagers killing each other. So it's pretty thrilling, but it's a show that hopefully a local theater will pick up by our listeners, or if our listeners are involved in high school theater or regional theater, they could just go over to Broadway Licensing and request a perusal.
All right. Well, I wish you much luck in the future. I hope some licensing suddenly comes up.
Oh, I can't top that.
Okay, and I will say I heard all the places that you have licensed it and where it's being performed, and I'm glad you've brought some joy to Montana because they have so little. Sorry. I have a running joke on my Survivor podcast where I bag on Montana, so that's totally fitting.
Okay, come on, it's Big Sky Country.
All right, so anyway, once again, my name is Mario Lanza. This is Staff Picks. If you need to reach me, you can reach me at staffpickspodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter at Mario J. Lanza. Until next time, I'll be out there searching for more movies that deserve more love, and I'll try to find somebody interesting to come on and talk about them. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.
Are you uncomfortable meeting new people? Well, I think that's a yes. Don't you agree, Harold? Should sex education be taught outside the home? Oh, I would say no, wouldn't you, Harold? Yeah, we'll give a D then. Do you remember jokes and take pleasure in relating them to others? Now, you don't do that, do you, Harold? No, absolutely no. Do you often get the feeling that perhaps life isn't worth living? What do you think, Harold? A, B? Oh, we'll put down C, not sure. Is the subject of sex being overexploited by our mass media? That would have to be yes, wouldn't it? Do you enjoy... Harold, please. Do you have ups and downs without obvious reason? That's you, Harold.